Calvary, it is hard to believe how much our lives have changed since I wrote you on March 12th, announcing that we would be closing our building because of the COVID-19 outbreak. Almost 3 months later, we now know that we're in the midst of a full-blown global pandemic that will last many, many months, not just a handful of weeks. At Calvary, we felt the seriousness of this illness early on, as our own David Farwig was diagnosed with COVID-19. We felt its gravity even more as we lost church members and friends because of this disease. We grieve with Sandra Baldridge upon the loss of her husband, Sam, and with Pam and Rick Chapman upon the loss of Pam's mom, Shirley. And at the same time, we give thanks for those in our church family who have recovered from COVID-19, even as we pray for those who continue to serve on the front lines and who experience the devastation of the coronavirus firsthand. I would venture to say that all of us have felt the economic, psychological, emotional, and spiritual impact of COVID. We miss gathering together. We miss singing, we miss hugging, we miss lingering, we miss seeing smiles and reading body language. We miss the freedom of not having to worry about wearing a mask or having to be strategic about when and how we're going to get our groceries. We miss the energy of in-person worship. We miss those hallway conversations and Bible studies. We miss human face-to-face connection. We are missing so much and grieving a lot, which means that we're feeling a roller coaster range of emotions on any given day. It's a really hard time. Acknowledging all of these realities and the additional grief and loss of so many events and plans being canceled, I have difficult news to share with you. Calvary's building will remain closed through the summer months, June, July, and August. While, of course, we hope to be able to gather in the building in some capacity after Labor Day in September, we will not know that for sure until closer to that date. I know. This is not what you want to hear. It's not what I want to be sharing with you. I think we all thought back in March that surely by May or June we'd be gathering back together. But after much prayer, after thorough research on what we know so far about the nature of the coronavirus and how our human behavior affects its spread, after conversations with colleagues and listening to government advice and CDC guidelines, after attending church insurance webinars and outlining the plans and procedures for what it would take to safely reopen our building, and then envisioning how limited and how different those gatherings would be, we have decided to keep our building closed until we can safely reopen with more of our congregation able to gather than we're able to now. This decision has not been made lightly nor in isolation. It has been an ongoing conversation with council leadership, with our COVID-19 leadership team, and with staff. And while I'm sure you are hearing of some churches that are choosing to gather for in-person worship already, I can also assure you that Calvary is not alone in the faith-based community in Denver in making the decision that we are. Because here's the thing, while much has changed in 3 months, and much will continue to shift and change as this pandemic plays out, the values that guided our decision back on March 12th to close our building, those have not changed. Our life together is centered on the call and love of Christ. When the religious leaders of his day asked Jesus what the greatest commandment was, he told them it was to love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, your mind, your strength. He then added that the second greatest commandment is like the first, to love your neighbor as yourself. And so as a community of faith whose mission is to be a Christ-like community that experiences and shares God's love, and whose vision is to be open to all and closed to none, we frame our actions and our decisions by these two commandments. And so with the values of love of neighbor and protecting the vulnerable in mind, I invite you to consider these points. 1, Calvary has always shown a strong commitment to the common good. As much as we love our building and as much as we long to gather again in it, we know that our essential nature as a church comes not through whether our building is open, but rather through how open our hearts are to the movement of God's Spirit within us and among us during such a time as this, and how open our minds are to exploring new avenues of ministry. 2, because our essential nature as a church does not depend upon a building, even when we can officially gather with more than 10 people, or even with 25 people or 50 people, the question remains, should we? For the sake of the economy and people's livelihoods, it is essential for more businesses to open, as we are seeing this week with restaurants opening for dine-in service. By our building remaining closed, we are supporting other businesses who cannot survive without opening their storefront, their physical location. And thus we're doing our part to not contribute to additional spread of COVID-19, which could really set us back as a city and state and endanger lives. This is a matter of economic justice as we do our part to support the many Coloradans who need to get back to work. And it's a matter of protecting the vulnerable as we lower risk and spread, which helps our healthcare systems and frontline workers. 3, even as other businesses do begin to open their doors again, remember that churches are not like businesses. Most businesses that are reopening with success have the ability to serve customers in one-on-one or very small group settings, thus limiting the risk of exposure. Churches don't operate that way. We're about group functions and large-scale gatherings where the known risk of accidentally spreading infection is exponentially higher. We are relational in our work, not transactional. And this makes a fundamental difference in how and when we can reopen. And then, as a community that is open to all, closed to none, we make our decisions with our whole community in mind. We covenant to not deliberately isolate people by age group or any other risk factor. In this way, we're choosing to prioritize the community over the individual. The reality is, we all have a different risk tolerance. I know that some of us will be breathing a sigh of relief at this decision, and that others of us will be frustrated and feel that we are being too cautious. But we are called to have a wider and more inclusive perspective than any one of our individual desires. And that's hard, I know. But because we are a multi-generational congregation, it's important that when we come back together with as many people as possible in our community who can gather safely, without having to enforce additional restrictions on top of the required health-related restrictions and distancing and disinfecting guidelines we're going to have to be following anyway. And then consider this. Making a decision about summer and evaluating whether or not our building is open on a quarterly basis instead of just waiting week to week for more data and constantly being in decision-making mode. Well, this allows us to process and to accept the reality of what this means for our life together as a community so that we can move forward with more intention and care. It also moves us as staff from crisis mode into creativity mode, freeing us to focus on what we can do instead of focusing on what we cannot do and wondering when that may or may not change. In addition to the scientific data that shows COVID-19 spreads quickly in large gatherings because it lingers a long time, not only on surfaces, but also in the air itself, especially in indoor air-conditioned spaces, I also know from firsthand experience that our habits will be very hard to break in terms of how we gather. Which, let's face it, at Calvary, we are very personal and we are very connective with one another. No matter our good intentions, it will be hard not to be able to be close to each other, to greet each other, to fellowship together, to sing, or to engage in many of the behaviors that make being together meaningful for us as a church community. While sure, our online experience lacks the relational power of in-person worship, the in-person worship experience available to us right now is far less than ideal. It's of diminished quality, and it would put our most vulnerable members and guests at risk. Plus, there is just the bizarre and maddening nature of this disease to consider, that we can carry it and spread it without ever even knowing that we have it. The study that I linked to in my letter to you shows the reality of this fact. I encourage you to study that graphic. Also, ensuring the safety of the staff is of utmost importance. When Calvary's building opens, you as congregation members will have the option of whether or not you choose to enter the building and come together and gather, whereas we as staff will be exposed to the most people for the longest periods of time. And we know that we cannot eliminate all risk, but it is important for Calvary to have proper disinfectant supplies and distancing protocols and procedures in place before opening the building, not just for your safety, but for our safety too. Speaking of disinfectant supplies and distancing protocols, Lori Grosskopf has been working on building reopening plans for weeks. And the COVID-19 team will expand and intensify these efforts this summer. The logistics of safely opening the building for gatherings are complex and multi-layered, as you might imagine. And while cleaning supplies were ordered back in March, it's likely that we will not receive the majority of those supplies until mid-July. Then it'll take several weeks to outfit the building with these supplies, implement our safety plans, protocols, and new signage, train volunteers and staff on our new ways of gathering together, and then communicate these guidelines to you. That's a lot. But in the meantime, know that the staff will be focusing on the ways that we can safely gather outdoors in small or larger gatherings throughout the summer. We're blessed to live in Colorado, which has beautiful weather, which means we can come together outside. And so we look forward to sharing those plans and opportunities with you in the coming weeks, as well as ways that we will continue to connect virtually and through other appropriate socially distanced methods. You know, our virtual worship services, which have more than twice the attendance of our previous in-person worship services, those are going to continue, and they will connect us and they will share the gospel in powerful ways. It's a spiritually rich time for so many of us as we all search for meaning and hope in the midst of this pandemic. We need God and we need one another now more than ever. And so yes, Calvary, I feel it like you do. It has been so hard not to gather in our building. And yet, I have been so proud of how you have truly lived into being the church over the past several months. You have shown up for one another and for yourselves in remarkable ways, writing cards, making calls, making deliveries, giving generously, learning new technologies, and supporting staff as we've sought to adapt and learn quickly new ways of doing ministry. I could not be prouder than I am in this moment to be your pastor. It is because of how you are already being the church in such significant ways in this time that I know we will make it through whatever the coming months hold. And I think we'll make it through stronger than we've ever been before. You know, in moments of anxiety and uncertainty in our society, we have the opportunity as God's people to model another way, a way that leads us forward in faith, not fear. We believe this to be Christ's way of love and compassion and justice. And as we take precautions for ourselves and loved ones, it is our faith and our trust in God that brings us comfort and strength. As you process this news, if you have any questions about this decision, please call me or email me. I am here for you, as is our entire staff. As we live through this unprecedented season together, know that you journey with God and with a community that loves you and prays for you. Many, many thanks to my colleagues for their guidance in this decision, to our council for all of their wisdom and input, and to our COVID-19 response lay leadership team, which includes Sharon Murphy and Rick Breitenbecker, our co-moderators, Bill Warren, the chair of resource management, Jim Comstock, the chair of safety and security, Verge Musil, the treasurer and the chair of finance, and Mick Davey, the chair of staff relations. Peace be with you, Calvary. We will continue to be the church together, even while we are apart.